I first got interested in communicating with him over the book that was read in one of our clusters, and it's Not Your Parents' Offering Plate. We found it just fascinating. One of our pastors then led a kind of a learning community gathering over the content of that book for a lot of our smaller churches, and there was just a lot of discussion and interest in relationship to what we thought were some really unique ideas in communicating finances and giving within the local church. And then through this group, one of the other guys had raised the question about in larger churches, again, this idea of stewardship and capital fundraising. I'm sure Roy and John and any others, money's never an issue for any church, right? So you guys have it all figured out, but you're going to get a bunch of information you can share with other people who don't have it figured out. So Dr. Christopher came to mind, and so I just reached out, asked him if he'd be interested in kind of talking with us, recognizing that this is a group of guys in larger churches, over 1,000 typically is what we're looking at, and just share some of his ideas and observations. He is the CEO of Horizons Stewardship Company and is a church consultant. He's been a pastor of Methodist churches, and yeah, just looking forward to any ideas you might have to share with these guys. So really appreciate you taking the time to invest in us.
Thank you. So, yeah, I really don't know how you guys would like to proceed. You know, I'm perfectly happy to preach here for the next hour and a half on all the things that you should be doing. Or we can have more of an interaction and dialogue, and I can respond to any of your specific questions. So I'm pretty comfortable with going, you know, in multiple directions. How would you all prefer to proceed?
So what I was hoping is if you could share some of your insights, especially as it relates to larger churches, and so maybe take the next half hour to kind of share with us some of your thoughts and observations and experiences, and then if we could open it up for 15 minutes or so, try to keep this within an hour, but yeah, for them to ask questions. If that works for you, that's what I'd like to see.
That'd be fine. How many of you have read Not Your Parents' Offering Plate or any of the other books I've written?
I have.
One? Okay.
No, well, I have.
All right.
I definitely
Yeah.
A couple of you?
Yeah.
Okay. That's helpful. So some of what I'll share here would be a repeat of a little of what some of the other stuff you have read. In looking at stewardship in the 21st century, we see that the church is receiving a smaller and smaller and smaller share of the charitable dollar. We are still America's favorite charity in that we get more percentage, a higher percentage of charitable dollars than anyone else, but that percentage is 1/2 of what it used to be. So though we have seen drops in church attendance, participation overall throughout church with a big C, we've seen an even greater drop in the church receiving the financial resources that it used to. Question gets to, you know, why? What is going on that is causing Americans not to choose us? And that, in a sense, is the question and it has within it the answer. Americans do choose. My father really didn't choose to give to the church. You just did. It wasn't something you even thought about. It wasn't something you had an option in. It wasn't a choice he was given. That's what you did back then. You grew up, you saluted the flag, you gave to the church. I mean, you don't think about it. The whole culture and environment has changed. And now Americans are choosing to either give or not give. Even those who profess Jesus as Lord, many are choosing to share their financial resources with one of the 1.5 million nonprofits in America versus just automatically giving it to the church. That realization that you will have fewer and fewer people giving to you just because you have the name church on your sign is a realization, a new realization for a great many pastors and churches. Their predominant stewardship message has continued to be, we are the church, therefore you give to us. And I have seen in the last 27 years that I've run Horizons that sells less and less and less and less. They will challenge you on, I give to the church, but I'm weighing where I'm getting the biggest return. And I think I'm getting a bigger return from the soup kitchen downtown in making a difference. And I think Jesus is at work in the soup kitchen too. And in fact, I think more lives may be being impacted at the soup kitchen. And so as I measure it, they need to get more of my dollar. Now we can accept that or reject it, but the fact is it's true. And so in dealing with that reality, what we have to learn to do that very few of us have learned is how do we compete in that environment? We are in a competitive environment that we're not used to. Pastors are fairly used to bringing sermons, giving education as to why giving should be a part of one's discipleship, why giving is a good thing. What they're not used to doing is why should you give to us versus giving elsewhere. That is the argument that we haven't learned how to make. I've shared the story before about when I went to the college I went to. There was one place in town to where you could get a hamburger. There was one. It was Brannon's Drive-In. And you get a hamburger, a foot-long chili dog, and a Coke at Brannon's. And I mean, we take dates to Brannon's Drive-In. That was the place. And they used to have a little ad in our college newspaper, if you want a burger, come to Brannon. That was it. Well, flash forward 28 years or so, and my son is going to the same college. And when he gets there, there's a McDonald's, and there's a Wendy's, and there's a Sonic, and there's a Hardee's, and go right on down the line. Everything that could be was there, except for Brannon's Drive-In. And Brannon's no longer was there because all they knew to say was, if you want a burger, come here. They didn't know how to say, our burger's better, and why. They never learned how to compete. Where Wendy's would say, hey, we got a square burger. And Burger King is ours is flame broiled. And McDonald's is, special sauce, lettuce, cheese, tomatoes, pickles, and da, da, da. They knew we have to stand out in some way to show to people, you've got so much money for burgers, why should it be spent here? The church has not learned how to communicate its message in such a way that would cause people to choose it. And because they said, well, golly, we don't want to say that we're better than the Salvation Army. I mean, we think that's a great thing. We wouldn't want to compete with the homeless shelter, et cetera, et cetera. You're not saying that they are bad. You simply need to learn how to say that you are good and worth it. You need to learn to tell your story like they have learned to tell theirs. That's a big difference, and particularly in the large church, to where there are very high expectations, we have to do a great job of communicating the prime message, which is lives are changed here in the name of Christ. That's the main message. Lives are changed here. And that's why we want you to give, because we are changing lives. Not because we're the church, not because your granddaddy did it, but because lives are being changed. And we do, in general, a pretty poor job of doing that. Now, research is done almost every year on the question of why do Americans choose to give? What goes through their thought process? And there's three things that consistently come out on top. And the number one reason why Americans say they give is their belief in the mission. They believe in what you're doing, and they believe you're doing it well. And that almost always gets down to affecting and changing lives. Every nonprofit in America is aware that that's the number one thing that they need to sell. And so you look on their websites, you read their communication pieces, and they are sharing life stories that can be well understood of how their mission changed and affected lives for the better. There's almost nobody in America that likes things just like they are. They want to believe that what I give away will make a difference and lives will be affected. And so as they come to see that clearly, they tend to give more away. So the college is going to tell a story clearly as it can from a student as to how that student's life was positively affected by the college. Boy Scouts are going to put a boy up in front saying, here is the impact it had on my life, and on and on. You go to church websites and look at a lot of their materials, and the emphasis, the first picture on the website is the building. Sometimes it's the smiling face of the preacher, but it's not the testimony of somebody whose life has changed. And that's a lesson we need to learn. It's the number one reason why people choose to give. The second one is the regard for staff. That people develop a personal connection to the point that they believe that they can highly trust this person with my money to bring about the desired result that I wanted to have. So having a high degree of confidence in that pastor is vital. And nonprofits, again, they know it. The number one fundraiser in every college in America is the president of the college. It's not the people in the fundraising department. It's the president of the college. Because he or she has got the greatest ability to take the money and apply it in a way that the donors to that college want it done. And so if they have confidence in that person and a relationship with that person, they're far more likely to give than not. Churches, on the other hand, are notoriously bad at that. Now, our larger churches are a little better than the small ones, but George Barna's research showed that only 26% of all the pastors in America even know who their donors are. The rest of them don't know. And when you're one of those 74% and you don't know who your donors are, you're going to have a very difficult time in relating to those persons in a way that enables the highest degree of their resources to come to you. It's a big mistake churches make. And it needs to be changed if we want to accomplish more of our mission. Then the last piece that I'd share with you that's a real key as to why Americans give. They give where they see a high degree of fiscal responsibility. In other words, they want to believe that the money they gave is really going to where they wanted it to go. It's not just propping up a sinking ship. There's not a nonprofit I know of that airs its dirty laundry to its donors. They keep talking about their mission. Now, they may have financial trouble, but what they do is that they deal with that in-house. They don't go out to the masses and say, we're dying, please come throw your money in our rat hole. No, it doesn't work. We think it does, and churches every year will send out communications to that effect. We're hitting those horrible summer months, you know, and we know money's going to be really bad and da-da-da, and we hope you'll come in. Or we are going through a downturn and we're 6.5% behind in the budget, and we hope you'll give. Those kind of messages that churches are notorious for sending are never sent by our competition. They aren't. And donors who are being communicated with now like they never have been by multiple groups begin to notice that the church is the only one that year after year after year seems to be crying wolf and not having enough. Maybe my money is not well used there. They can't get their act together. I'm going to take a look at someplace else. And I've sat with, I can't tell you the number of donors who personally look at me and share a story exactly like that. They just have developed a greater sense of confidence. So we've got to quit sending those letters. We have to change our whole approach to that. We've got churches that love to print giving numbers in their worship bulletins and stuff, that they have a horrible practice. Almost always sends a bad signal. Those types of things we've never learned. All of them put us at a disadvantage in trying to compete for those dollars that are wanting to go to change lives. Others are competing in a greater sense and getting a greater share of those dollars because of it. In the way of the large church, again, I'll put this out there, and you know, it's just one of the points that y'all may want to talk about later. As we have seen churches struggling to attract the masses as they used to, one of the things that has occurred is, in an attempt to get more people, we have lowered the expectations. We have downgraded the expectations of what it was, none of which is biblical. There's nothing about downgrading expectations that fits very well with what Jesus said to the disciples. But we've done it to get people. And what that's caused is that we have a very weak, very shallow pew sitter today, who never heard that there's an expectation to give, who never really heard and understood that a disciple of Christ is a worker out there in the fields for the harvest, who never heard that they need to be in mission. You know, they were welcomed in the church and given a spot to sit and made to feel good without any expectation or accountability in that at all. And I'd go so far as to say no discipleship, you know, in that. And that has become rampant. We have to raise those expectations on the front end if we're going to fix our stewardship problem. And again, understand that stewardship is a subset of discipleship. It's not at the top of the rung. Being a disciple of Christ is at the top. Stewardship is something you must learn to truly be the disciple you should be. But discipleship's the end result. And we're bringing people into the church and treating them as full participants in churches that have membership with a handshake and a smile, and very little in a sense of expectations. This is what Jesus said a disciple is. And if you're going to marry Christ, which is what it is to be a part of the church, then you need to understand the commitment that is behind that. If you're not ready for full commitment, you don't need to be marrying Jesus. You just need to be dating Jesus. So come to the church, come to our Bible study, be a part of what you want, but you don't become a member or a full participant in the life of this church until you understand what commitment is. And commitment is attendance, and commitment is giving, and commitment is time in prayer, commitment is study, commitment is service. This is what Jesus is talking about. That on the front end needs to be laid out, that those who then take that next step know what they're getting into. We have dumbed down what being a Christian is in too many cases to get a few more butts in the seats, and then we get back from them really what we've led them to believe we expect, and we act shocked, but that's exactly what we had led them to believe. So we've got to focus a greater sense of expectation, I think, understanding what it is to compete, and beginning to shape our culture in and around that with the churches. The large church needs to be sure that it is seeking gifts from all three pockets of giving on a regular basis. There's three different pockets to work with. The annual pocket, which is your earned income, basically your wallet. We do pretty good with that. We ask folks to earn some money each week and then to give us a piece of that in the offering plate. That's the annual income. Then we have capital income, and those are accumulated assets, stocks, bonds, property, inheritances, various things that come into our life, and we stick them over here in this hole, but they're not used as a part of our cash flow. We don't buy groceries with that. We don't pay rent with that. But it's ours. We're accountable for it. And it sits here until such time as if something comes along that we're willing to take a look. Could that pocket potentially, make a difference here? I can reach in there without affecting my cash flow. And then there's the planned giving pocket, or the estate pocket, that everybody has. Every one of your members is going to die. Have we taught them and instructed them how to be accountable for that which God has given them at the point of their death, and showed them how the church can use their estate and their gifts to continue to make a difference for the kingdom? The large church in particular needs to intentionally market for all three of those gifts every year. Every year. Then, there's something I was going to raise in the last one. Maybe I've covered some of the highlights. Let me just stop with that. That was a fairly decent monologue. You guys bring your questions forth, and I'll see what I can do with them.
Dr. Christopher, really like your book. Use it with churches all the time. So here's my question. If you were to rewrite that book, is there something that you've observed since then you wish were in there, or is there something you said you wish you had been more emphatic about, or something that you're getting kickback on or feedback on that you wish you had addressed?
Well, most of what I wish I had talked about more, I did talk about more in subsequent books. So,
okay.
If we're talking about Not Your Parents' Offering Plate, two of them that I would highlight would be that mission, our mission, reason to be, must be at the forefront of everything we do, and it must be fully understood by everyone in the life of that church. Most people in church do not understand what your mission is. And if I walked your halls today or Sunday morning and kept stopping every third person or so and said, hey, can you tell me what the mission of this church is? How many of them would give me the exact same answer? You know, do they know? You know, I reflect back to, I had 18 years of Army time in my life. And the first ethos of the Army ethic is we will always put mission first. And when you're in the Army, you come to see that's right. I mean, mission comes before everything. It is the, you know, sir, I think we ought to do this. The next thing he's going to say is, tell me how that's going to impact the mission. Everything has to do with mission. Most of the folks we have serving in the life of the church don't fully understand the mission. Therefore, they have a hard time judging whether you've been successful in the mission or not, because they never knew what it was really supposed to be, and they're not exactly sure what it is they're giving to. So it affects on down the line. That greater emphasis on everyone knowing the mission, and in kind of a different light, something I did not address at all in Not Your Parents' Offering Plate, but have a lot in a couple of other books, is the issue of debt. Debt is the one thing that I know of that can absolutely kill a good church. I mean, a really good church with a great pastor, great staff, excited, enthusiastic, committed congregation, and the wrong decision on one night in regards to debt can absolutely kill you. And very quickly, that debt becomes your mission. When the debt becomes your mission, then your members start to leave because that's not what they signed up for. You have a hard time attracting new people. It's a vicious cycle, and a very good church can go right down the tubes. So I address that issue of debt in some subsequent books that we frankly have not paid enough attention to. And it is a horrific problem right now with churches throughout America.
Which book would you recommend that you've written that addresses that particular issue?
The one that addresses it the most is probably Rich Church, Poor Church.
Okay. Yeah, because
it gives some guidelines and all on debt.
Yeah. I'm just seeing on the horizon again that huge push to facilities have got to be the biggest consumer in relationship to debt, and yet it's one of the greater struggles churches have. I mean, finding that balance between vision for the future and the reality of the present really causes a lot of difficulty there.
Yeah,
well, again, it goes back to mission. You know, you look at businesses in America. Their only thought, I mean, I can assure you, I live in the land of Walmart, you know, here in Arkansas. There is not a Walmart store built anywhere in which the company did not believe that store was going to generate a certain amount of profit to enhance the bottom line of giving their shareholders value. That's their mission. That's their reason to be. And that's the exact reason why they build, whether it's a small store, a mega store, what kind of store it is, to accomplish that mission. Well understood. Everybody knows it. But in the life of the church, it gets that the whole mission of why we're doing this seems to somehow escape us. And churches will spend millions on a facility. And when you say, you know, let's take a look at what you're expending with how many new disciples for Christ do you believe you can make? And you know, how is that justified itself, and why exactly can you not make that many disciples with the facilities you presently have? Because that's our bottom line. It's making disciples for Christ. And if we're going to spend $5 million on a building, is that going to produce for us 500 more disciples for Christ than we otherwise would get in our current facility? Can we forecast that and justify it? If it can, then don't do it.
Yeah.
We just don't need to do it.
John,
I get frustrated with churches a lot. They'll call me and say, we're looking to build a sanctuary, or we're looking to build a family life center, or whatever else. And they'll say, and we're thinking about having a mission component as well. Maybe we'll tithe a portion of we raise and give it to missions. Why do you want to do that? Well, we're going to be doing several million for us, and we thought a piece of that should go to others. This is a church that doesn't know who its customer is. The customer is not the Walmart guy that wears the little blue vest. The customer is the guy that's not in your store yet, that you got to get in there. Our customer is not the folks going to church who need, more plush pew cushions. Our customers that we serve are outside the church. So everything you build is a mission. And if you can't see it as a mission, you probably shouldn't be building it. Mm. And that's it's just a way that we have to learn to think.
I've inherited a church that has a lot of debt, and I really feel like we've done some really great things over the last couple of years in trying to establish that vision and that mission and clarify it. And so we see a lot of great things happening, and a lot of people's lives are being changed on constant basis. But we have this noose that just feels like an anchor that's holding us down. Yeah. We're trying to get a breath here, and it's impacting everything that we do. It's impacting our ability to do ministry.
What is your budget and what is your debt?
And our budget currently.
What's your annual budget? Oh man.
Yep.
You got a debt of 7.5 times budget, right?
Yeah.
That scares me to death. And here's why. Is it manageable? In the best of times, it's manageable. But we never know when something bad can happen.
Yep.
Somebody decides to fly a plane into a building. Yeah. The stock market has a real dive. A big plant closes down the road. Stuff happens.
Your pastor of 29 years leaves.
Yeah, there you go. And decides to leave you with the debt. And that pastor probably had a pretty good ability to go tap a handful of people after his years of relationships and said, hey, I need a little extra at the end of the year. Yeah. What happens is that can kill you, because all more of that is the bill you have to pay. Mm-hmm. You can't fire staff. You can't cut program. There's nothing you can do to lessen the impact of that. The people who gave you that money want to be paid.
Yep.
And the scary thing is that if something bad occurs, your options are to trim back what you're doing in mission and in the lives of people, youth work, children's work, go down the line. Okay, we saved enough money, we pay that debt.
Yeah.
But you just lost 12 families because they loved your youth program you just cut back.
Yeah.
They took their money and they went to a church that still had a youth program.
Yeah.
And only has, $1 million in debt. And this kind of cycle starts, and all of a sudden, what was a great, great church, you're sitting there almost helpless because debt kills you. I would, with a laser focus, I would get with your church leaders right now and say, what are we intentionally going to do to lower the principal on that debt?
Yeah.
And have some type of a campaign directed right at that.
Yeah. Yeah, we've done that, and we're in the midst of even doing some things with our mortgage company as well at this point in time, trying to figure out those things. But I was hoping that you just have an easy answer for me, because that's really what I'm hoping.
No, I don't.
Oh. I tried.
But one of the greatest things you could do for ministry, though, is to have some type of effort. And you've worked with the mortgage company till the cows come home, and that's not. I mean, you can lower the annual impact a little sometimes, and that's what you've got to really try to put a serious dent in, so that then when something bad happens, the stuff you have to pay is much less. So that's my great advice for you.
Yeah. So what is the debt to income ratio that doesn't make you say, oh my?
We get concerned and believe that debt has the ability to kill a church when it is greater than 2 times your annual budget.
Yeah.
And that the payment on that debt needs to be 15% or less of the annual budget.
I would ask this question. I agree with you about knowing donors. I agree with you that the pastor should know who gives. My guess is, if you're like I am working with churches, that's a big lump to swallow if they haven't been doing that. You talk a little bit about it in your book, but when you work with churches, what's the best arguments that you have found that worked in persuading them?
Again, it begins with the mission. And you have to keep them focused and have an argument with you about mission. And when you look at what information can you acquire to give you, the spiritual leader of the church, the single largest piece of diagnosis to understand the spiritual health and welfare of someone, I believe it's how they give.
Mm-hmm.
What they choose to do with their money will give you a clearer picture of what's happening in their heart than any other single indicator. And the reason for that is that money, with most of them, is probably the one thing they love more than God.
Mm-hmm.
And when they have decided to part with that, then there is a pretty good sign that something else has occupied that spot in their heart. You know, Billy Graham's the one that said the last thing between Jesus and somebody's heart is their wallet. It's the last guard on the heart. And you get the wallet, the heart's exposed. So how they give gives you one of the data points of the spiritual health of an individual, as well as to the church as a whole. It allows you to be the kind of pastor you need to be for their spiritual welfare, unlike nothing else. Okay. And we're talking proportional giving here. You know, we're not saying, oh, I want to make sure I know who the biggest donor is, so he and I go to lunch every week. If your biggest donor is Bill Gates, and he's giving you $50,000 a year, that really doesn't tell you very much, except that Bill Gates is probably not a committed disciple of Christ, because he's not parting with hardly anything at $50,000.
Yeah.
On the other hand, you'd have other members to where that'd be a tremendous sacrifice, and something's going on in their heart that just may be that they love Jesus, and you need to know it. That you can help place them, those who are real disciples and real stewards. They need to be the leaders in your church. You know, everybody would want that. You want people leading something they're good at and can be an example for others of. Or you want to make sure that if they're not good stewards, but they're big CEOs of a company or presidents of banks, and the thought is, oh, we need them on our finance or stewardship committee, you would know, no, we don't. Because what they know about money is not how it will impact our mission. they know how to balance a budget, and we're not in the budget balancing business. We're in the Jesus business. And when I got a bank president giving me $2,000 a year, then that's not the person I need to have in leadership. These are the types of things that pastors ought to know. You know, who do you want to have in the choir? People who can sing. Duh. And so is it wrong that the pastor spends a little time figuring out who can sing? No, the mission of the church says if I can get good singers and put them in the right place in worship, that serves the kingdom. And I'm a fool if I try to be blind to that. Same thing with giving. I mean, it's no different. That's a gift that some people have, and if they're exercising it, showing leadership in it, you need to know it so that you can minister to them and with your church in a better way.
Okay, thank you.
Now, very quickly, how do you get it done? Because I think the first thing you said was with churches that aren't doing it or have a rule against it, this is not easy. I kind of wrote a guide for that in the third book that I wrote, which was Whose Offering Plate Is It? 17 chapters of 17 key questions, of which 4 of those chapters deal with this. And it's how do we make that change? What you've got to do is to get a small core, a very small core of your church leaders, and you have all of them read either Rich Church, Poor Church, or Not Your Parents' Offering Plate, and have a discussion with that core around what that book says. There are strong chapters on this in there,
okay,
as well as on other things about changes we may want to make. When you get to that chapter, your discussion is, this makes some sense. What do you think? Should we be doing this? And you let the book drive the argument instead of the preacher driving the argument. And you become a participant in the circle of trying to determine how do we best take this information and apply it to accomplish our ultimate mission. You get that core on board, then you say to them at the end, how can you help me affect this change with this larger group, et cetera, et cetera. But you can't just approach an executive committee, a board, a council, whatever you may have within your church, and just say, hey, we should change this because it's a good idea.
Yeah.
You'll be suspect. You let the book drive that for you.
Okay, thank you.
Some great advice. Really appreciate that. There's something that you said earlier that just really struck me. Was that under the idea of the need to raise the expectation of stewardship?
Yes.
The difference between marrying and dating. Here's one of the problems that I see. Many of our churches, they're very happy just to have dating people.
Oh yeah. And you know, again, go back and read the scripture. You know, when Jesus was beginning his ministry, there was one point where it said the crowds were flocking behind him, and he was going from place to place, and he had all these crowds. And he turned around, as you probably know, at one point and said to them, look, you know, if you're not prepared, you know, to love this mission more than mother, father, sister, brother, if you're not prepared to pick up a cross, if you're not ready to be fully committed, I don't need you just hanging around. You kind of get in the way. This is a high expectation deal. And you know, I guess there's a lot of them wandered off. You know what he said to the rich young ruler and to Nicodemus and others, you know, hey, just being a nice guy and checking the box. You know, we're talking about a full-born commitment. Too many of our people are feeling like they got the merit badge without the commitment. And, you know, then when we bring that stewardship sermon in and, you know, in the second Sunday of October, you know, they're like, where'd this come from? You know, I just want to come. I like listening to the band. You know, the sermon's kind of relevant to today, and that's a good thing. And I'm going home and I'm done, and I check that box. We don't want to tell them not to come. We just want them to know that there's to fully know Jesus as Lord is indeed to marry Jesus with a high commitment, and that's a whole nother step from liking the band and you know, saying it was a nice sermon.
So how would you bridge that gap between the mass that you have showing up on Sunday that are all different levels of commitment, and hone in on reaching a group of people that have the most potential to move up in their commitment level? Does that make sense? It's a poor question, but.
Yeah, and some of your churches are probably unique. Some of you probably have membership, and some of you may not even have membership at all.
Right.
I don't know where you may come from, but if indeed there is such a thing as membership, a decision point that someone makes to affiliate with you, where you raise that expectation level is having a series of classes and understandings of what it is to be a disciple of Christ prior to that moment. Now, if you don't have anything, everybody just comes, and if you walk in the door, you're all the same, I think you should back up and take a real look at as to whether that's the most helpful way to make life, because it can encourage that.
I'm sorry.
I think it's me.
No, it's me. I apologize. I'm sorry.
That's okay. But that's where you do it. We have a lot of churches, they'll bring someone into membership. Say, yeah, you're a member, Sally. Good for you. And hey, if you want later on, there's some classes. It's a little late. Sally's already got the merit badge. You want people to know fully what it is. How your commitment to prayer, your commitment to presence and attendance, gifts, to giving, and to service, and to witnessing. What do we expect? What did Jesus expect? And if that's a journey you really want to be on, then we want you to come be on it with us. If you're not quite ready, then just keep dating. You keep learning. But we hope you'll get to the point that you want to step this up to a higher level. It's got to be done on the very front end.
Very good. Anybody else? Thoughts?
I've one question for you. You talked about demonstrating fiscal responsibility, and boy, in our area, especially with the LDS community where that's very secretive, that's huge. Fortunately, right now, our giving is running ahead of our budget, and that seems like it's easier to do then. But how would you communicate fiscal responsibility, especially when the numbers are red and we don't send out that 911 letter or communication in any other way that I agree with you is very detrimental to people's giving? So how do you balance fiscal responsibility, but the numbers may not be the most encouraging number? How do you do both of those things?
First, it's just a matter of principle. Any and every communique, be it hard mail, email, however you get information out within your church, there needs to be a changing life story that accompanies it. The first thing they need to read is the story of how Bob and Mary's family was impacted, changed, transformed by the work of your church. That's the first thing they read. That then is followed by something that says, this kind of ministry that happens in our church on a regular basis occurs because of your gifts in support of the church, and we're so grateful. Presently, the standing of the church is this. And you lay it out. You can say that we have had a tough year so far. Behind where we hope to be. But with your continued help and et cetera, we know that we can continue to do great things and on and on. The the one thing that you don't do is just send that money and that percentage kind of letter. If everybody would get together and give 3.6% in addition to what they're doing, we'd achieve our goal. We are $47,684 behind. So that's the kind of thing you don't do. You want people to see lives are being changed here. And if you want more lives to be changed, we're going to have to do more. If we're satisfied with what we're currently doing and want to stay there, then they'll make that decision. Let me caution you too, to be sure you're always sharing honestly. Go back 3 to 5 years and see what your income as compared to your budget was in January, February, March, April, every month of the year. You get 12.4% on average in the month of January, or 10.2 in February. What's been your history of giving in your church? Because 90% of all churches are year-end givers in the high end. December is the highest and best month of giving in most churches. If that's where it is in yours, you need to know it and you need to own it. That come June, you don't say, we're halfway through the year, but we only have 44% of our money in. That sends a very negative signal, where actually, historically, you've usually only had 39%. You're doing pretty good. But everybody heard that it's going badly, and that will tend to have them pull back than to go on. So make sure your communications on giving are honest and forthright.
Great, thank you.
Well, thank you. It's been a blessing for me. I trust it's been for these other guys. With your permission, we're going to push this out to the other participants, the video. I've recorded it, and push it out to them. And
if you think I've said anything that'll be helpful, please put it out there.
Well,
if it's absolutely stunk up the joint, you can forget we ever did this.
Well,
whatever helps the kingdom is what we want to be about.
I know personally you've sold a couple of books that I'm going to be buying, so it'll be
well, I happen to have a stack here of some others that you might want to get familiar with.
Well, it's just nice to see that something good can come out of Arkansas. That's what we want.
Well, I'll tell you what, guys, it ain't football this year, that's for sure.
I think one of the central things that should be grasped is what you so precisely began with. Americans today choose their giving like they've never done before, and
that's right.
If you can embrace that, I think that would just be a powerful thing. Anybody else have any other question before we?
I just want to thank you for what you gave us. Thank you.
Yeah,
hope it helps. Thank you. Thank you all. Bye-bye.